Welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel, a clinical hypnotherapist. And I am delighted to have Dina Glouberman with me today. And I'm very excited because a few months ago, I had the pleasure of reading her book, You Are What You Imagine. And so today we're going to find out a little bit about that. Welcome, Dina.
Thank you. Welcome to you, to my life.
Well, I love the title of your book. You are what you imagine, because of course, being a hypnotherapist, I know that that is true. So perhaps we can start with you telling us what you mean by you are what you imagine.
Well, what that means is that um, our whole life is, in a way, rests on a foundation of the imagination. In other words, everything we do and say and think and feel, behind it, there's some image of ourself or an image of the world or an image of how to do things, which is taking us where we're going. And um, normally, we have a whole slew of taken for granted images. I call that the everyday imagination, which we've learned from our family, our past, our conditioning, our culture, all of that. And so we don't think too much about it. We follow where our imagination takes us, and we take for granted that what we're seeing is the truth. But of course, we're not really seeing the truth. We're seeing our image of ourselves, our image of our lives, and so on. So when I work with imagery, I say to people, well, if you can imagine it, you can create it. So your life is the best you've been able to imagine. Um, if you want a different life, you have to learn to imagine better. And to imagine better is to sink into another level of the imagination, not that everyday conditioning, but into that creative part of you. Um, and and bring those old images into the present and into what your heart really desires, rather than what you've been told you want.
And some of this too, and what you said about the image of yourself, we live up to the image we have of ourselves. And if we have a negative image of ourselves, of course, we're going to act according to that image or live according to that image,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't understand or believe that there are other possibilities that are more positive and which we can explore. They're out of reach. And of course that
Yeah.
into very to a degree a sense of hope. Well, depending on where we are on the scale, it's a degree of hopelessness.
Yes, it can be. I want to say that having a negative picture of ourselves is not usually about everything. So there will be some areas where you could be terribly confident. Somebody else would be scared, and you would absolutely know you could do this thing. And then there's something else which people say, "What the hell happened to you?" Because you suddenly, um, look all embarrassed or having a difficult time or whatever. And it's because there are areas of vulnerability where your self-esteem goes right down. So it's not that we are all of one thing or all of another thing. I, I say our consciousness has many rooms. And so in some of those rooms, I'm fabulous. In other rooms, could do better. It depends on, is it the adult? Is it the child? Is it the therapist? Is it the victim? It depends which of my personas I'm into at the moment. And they don't always communicate with each other. So I might be absolutely wonderful in one thing, but I haven't told myself that that might be true of other areas of my life as well. So yeah.
Sometimes we can kind of coast along in life, and very often people come to me because they're not at a crisis, as in there's nothing that is pushing them to act or change, but they have this vague sense of being lost or feeling as though they're empty. There's something empty. And they feel they need to do something, but no, they're not, they're just not acting. I always say, of course, just acknowledging it and asking for help is an action in itself. But in your book, you talk about something that I'm very familiar with as well, is the catalysts for change.
Yes. Yes.
So tell us a little bit about those catalysts.
Okay. So, um, before I do, as I was listening to you, I was thinking of another meaning for you all, which you imagine, which is I was talking about the images of ourselves that and of the world that we have. But those images are not private because they are our relationship with the world. And so other people can actually see from our posture, from the way we're talking, what our image is at that moment. And I'm reminded of a time when I was in Skiros, which is the holiday center I created with my ex-husband in 1979, a long time ago. Is on the Greek island of Skiros, and we have groups there of various kinds. And there was a woman in my group. I was running one of my image work groups, working with imagery, who it was on top of a hill, and the woman's husband would pick her up every day from the workshop, and she told us as they went down the hill, he would criticize her nonstop. And so in the group, she started talking about this and working on it, and suddenly she kind of realized that she didn't have to take this criticism. She just shifted her point of view. And husband picked her up that day. Next day, we were all very eager and said, "So what did you say when your husband criticized you?" And she said, "He didn't criticize me." and I never forgot that, because he saw she wasn't someone you were going to criticize nonstop going down the hill. She had changed. So her image of herself was there in her relationship to the world, and he saw it, and he responded accordingly.
So I started to smile broadly when you were recounting the story, because I've heard this and seen this with clients so many times, that when their perspective shifts,
Yes,
suddenly people are looking at them differently.
looking at them different. Obviously, well, they're seeing them differently. They're seeing a different person. You know, and that's very exciting when they realize they don't have to do anything. It's there. Their imagination has transformed them. So that's very interesting. Now, you asked me about the catalysts. Now, what I'm talking about in the book that you like so much, You Are What You Imagine, is kind of the three basic stages of moving from where you are to where you want to be. And the first stage is what I call the catalyst. And what that means is we start from somewhere. If we're about to do a life change, we start from somewhere that is for some reason not stable or comfortable or what we want, or something makes us want to shift. And as you say, it might not be bad, it might just feel empty, or I might feel stuck or whatever. Sometimes it's worse than that. Sometimes I'm in despair. It could be anything. But what happens when we're in a state like that very often is it feels like it's forever, and that's why people get very depressed. Because to be depressed is to say that there's no future, or this is the future. There isn't another one. That's it. And what I'm saying about the catalyst is that actually it's um, it's a kind of a carriage into your transformation. You're starting from this place where there is a problem of some kind, and you explore that problem, and you honor the problem, and you allow yourself to work with it and to transform some of the issues. And only when that has happened, you can move on to the next stage, which is the visioning of what you want. But until you've dealt with the catalyst, which is where you are now, um, well, let's put it this way. If you don't transform the problem that you had, your vision will be very limited because it'll come from where you are limited. But if you work at the beginning with the images that you have that are bringing you either unhappiness or stuckness or whatever, if you move those along, then you are a new shape. And then you can vision something that is more suitable for the new you, kind of thing.
I think there are a couple of things that popped into my mind as I was listening to you. The first was remembering something that my teacher, when I was training in hypnotherapy, said, and he said, the more uncomfortable your client is, the better your chances of success.
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
and of course that's true, because if you're sitting on the sofa and you're nice and comfortable, are you going to move? If you're
Absolutely.
sitting on the sofa and it's, the room is cold, or it's an old sofa and it's a bit lumpy, or you can't get your back comfortable on it, are you going to sit there or are you going to move? And maybe you're really tired, maybe you're so tired that you'd rather put up with the discomfort than move. But then on the other hand, maybe you're hungry, you're cold, you're not comfortable. How long are you going to say, I'm too tired to move, before you actually decide that you better get up and get dinner, or close the window, or turn on the heating? And I think it's very much that thing that we juggle with all the time. And I'm sure that you've seen it, I see it very often. There's almost an apathy and a being used to the discomfort, or putting up with the discomfort out of fear, out of hopelessness, which means you can't see a way out, and thinking, well, better this than the unknown. And
Mm,
that's a big one to wrestle with, isn't it?
mm. I would say that the minute that they've come to see you, as you say, they have already said, I'm uncomfortable enough to want to do something about it.
Exactly.
The power of that imagination, that I call the everyday imagination, rather than the one we work with, which is the transformational one, the power of it is that you don't even have to be in despair or anything else. You just take for granted that that's how things are. You know, it's a bit like when I was a kid, you know, I took for granted my family was how it was. It never occurred to me that there was a comment that I could make about my family, that I could say, there's this problem. It was just, and none of us thought that. Now, it might be different nowadays, but when I was growing up, we never talked about the problems we had in our family. We didn't have any problems because we didn't know that what was happening could be different, you know. And so I think people spend a lot of their life not knowing that things could be different, and that's just holding on to the status quo because it's what you know. Even it doesn't have to be you're afraid of something else. It's just all you know. So, but the minute somebody comes and sees you, they're saying, "Oh, maybe there's something else in life." And I can work with that. And what I do is I work with people's imagery. So I might I've got an image exercise, for example, which is called Images Life Metaphor. So I would ask people to allow to emerge an image of themselves as an animal, plant, or an object that somehow represents who they are or what they need to know. Now, some of the people listening to this will already have an image without my doing any relaxation. So, for example, I might have an image of being a lion in a cage. Okay, lots of people have images of being animals in a cage. It's a very common image. What's very interesting about that image is that the cage is never completely locked. I have never seen a cage that was completely locked. There's always a key somewhere, or the door's really open, or there's a way to get out. It's really interesting. And I've done work on burnout as well, where people feel trapped and they feel they can't change their lives. And whenever I hear the word trapped, it's a bit like lion in a cage. I know they're not trapped because they believe they're trapped because they can't see the other point of view. If they said this is necessary, that's different, and then they don't burn out. But when they say I'm trapped, it's like that lion in the cage. So as soon as we work with that lion in the cage and the lion gets out of the cage and walks around and finds a new life, this person has already got a new image of themselves, which if they map back on their life, they will realize how stuck they felt and how they now have the freedom to make some new choices. So that's an example where the everyday imagine has told you, I'm in a cage, I have no options. And actually, they're never in a cage. I mean, they're in a cage, but they're never locked in. And it's really the only time I've seen something that was a little bit different was someone who, again, got out of his cage. He was some animal. He was probably some kind of wild animal in a cage. And what he did was he got out of the cage and he fell asleep. The animal fell asleep. And I said, uh-oh, because that was telling me he's got out of his cage, but he doesn't want to know. So, yeah.
It's really important that we understand the value of the images in our minds, and the fact that we operate on this symbolic level. This is why dreams are so intriguing, because they are speaking about our emotional landscape and the way in which we're perceiving ourselves, other people, situations in a symbolic form, in a narrative form. And so what you and I are doing is accessing that natural way in which our brains work in order to help people, first of all, understand themselves and what their emotions are saying. And then secondly, and we'll talk about that, is harnessing that to begin to change the perspective, which then leads to actual change. So maybe this is a good point then at which to start talking about turning points and using imagery for transformation.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So as we said, the first stage is the catalyst where we work with, say, the image is life metaphor. We might have a conversation with the child, find out what's going on with the child. We might have a conversation about our relationships and, again, transform those and so on. Until we get to the place where there's some sense of resolution, I'm ready to move on. And you see this with people. There's a point that they're ready to move on. And while they're still stuck in their old images, they're not really ready to move on, but they come to you to say, help me move on. And you say, hold on a minute. We need to first see why you don't feel you can move on, and then you can work with that. The next stage, the turning point, is when you need to get a vision of where you not only want to go, but where you are almost like meant to go, where your deepest self wants to go, because not just what you think you want. So a lot of the work, and I want to say something about that, a lot of the work that's done with imagery and visualization, and I call it image work, my approach. I don't call it visualization, because visualization implies that you're visual. Lots of people are not. I'm not. So I don't see visual images, but I can feel them, sense them, that kind of thing. So in terms of what people say, like you can create your own life. Okay, so you say, okay, I want a partner, a new car, a new house, and a successful career, or whatever it is. And then you get a picture, a clear picture of it, and then you work with that, and then you maybe stamp your way into that future. But the thing that you say you wanted, which part of you wants it? And is it what you've been told you want, or what the society has said you want? Have you found out what you really want? So um, what I work with is to allow your images to tell you something. So I do this little well, rather big imagery exercise, which is in the book as well. All these things I'm mentioning are in the book, which is what I call a space and time ship, where you take your ship off the face of the earth into the future, but you go to two futures. And this is really interesting. The first future is a negative future. It's, say, 5 years from now, and I feel unhappy about my life because I have neglected, abandoned, or betrayed my true self, let's say. Okay. The other future is the positive one, where you say, 5 years from now, and I'm really happy about my life. And I'm happy because I've honored my true self. Okay, so I'm starting off with this idea that we're not just going to say anything. It has to be connected to my truest self. Now, what's interesting is I take people first into that negative future. And lo and behold, and it's often pretty awful, this negative future. And then I say, now look back at the person you were and tell them the recipe for ending up feeling this bad. And the recipe is always just keep doing what you're doing. Just go on the way you're going on. Just don't change a thing. That's how you're going to end up here. And it's really scary for people when they see that it's so easy to get to that future. And later on, when they've seen both futures, and I say to them, tell us the part of you that wants that negative future. People admit to it and they say, well, it's safer. It's easier. It's easier to get there. It is very easy to get to that negative future. Just do nothing. However, it's not that pleasant when you get there, so you might not want to go that way. So that's the negative future. The positive future then is showing you what your true self wants for you. And then you can look at that, and then you can see how you got there. And then you write a letter to yourself. And yeah, you want to say
It,
something I could see.
yeah, no, it's just so true, because when we're looking at change, and I'm sitting with clients and we're looking at the possible steps towards change, the thing that they never, and they see that as a risk, they never seem to want to factor in the risk of not changing.
Exactly.
And that
Yeah.
loved that exercise when I saw it in the book, because that's exactly what I do. Is I'm saying, okay, so let's do a risk assessment for not changing.
Yeah, exactly.
What's the price for that? And
Exactly.
that's why I loved your book, and the exercise, that exercise in your book. And by the way, I really loved the way that you had exercises, I think after each chapter.
After each step
For
has an exercise, and I actually also have an audio. Well, I have a CD, but people don't use this anymore. But I have an audio on my website, which is dinaglouberman.com. So yeah, you probably put that on your thing.
yes, I will.
So, but so you can take it through it. But I want to tell you a story about that exercise and myself, because I said to you before we started that I have a new book coming out, but there's a history to that, which is I had thought about doing this new book. This new book is a training book for people to learn how to use imagery well in their professional life. And so I had been thinking about doing it and started to do a bit of writing. And then came coronavirus and lockdown. And I was just floored by it all, as we were. You know, we were in shock. The whole world had suddenly changed without any warning. And, oh, there was a warning for people that knew what to look for, but I didn't. And what happened was, I couldn't see a future. I couldn't see the point. I couldn't see how I could write a whole book because somehow you couldn't rely on the future anymore. All you had was the present. But I didn't know what to do with myself. And so I took my own CD, because I still have a CD player. Probably most of the people watching this don't, but I do. I took my own CD and I played that exercise to find out what to do. And so I did my negative future first. And the negative future was, it was really interesting. I couldn't breathe. I could hardly breathe. I was so ashamed. And what was I ashamed of? That I had done nothing, I'd created nothing, I'd achieved nothing. That was my negative, but I still remember that feeling. I couldn't breathe because I was so ashamed. And then, thank God, you leave that future and you go to the positive one. And in the positive one, where I was really happy, I was holding that book in my hand and I had done that book. Now, you know, then and I also kind of looked back and saw how I got there and did all the stuff that I do in that exercise. But I so much didn't want to end up unable to breathe because I was so ashamed, and so much did want to end up feeling good about my life, that the next day I started writing the book proposal. And that book's about to come out in April. So so that's an example of how you can make it work for you at a moment that you just don't know what to do. I think so many, you know, people had so many different reactions. You know, some people just stopped completely. Others got frantic, did 1,000 things. And I just thought, I just don't know what's the way forward. I need my images, you know, so that was lucky that I had them.
Yeah, I think one thing that I know is that not moving is not an option. So I have to do something. It's the only way to quell whatever unrest I feel. And then so I don't do big things because I need time to think through and to get the images clear in my head so I have a sense of direction. But I have to do something. And that small step of doing something frees me up
Yes,
then
yes,
to move. So it doesn't mean that I don't get frozen, because we all get frozen
yes.
in moments of panic.
You start
And
moving in any direction as long as you've taken that first step. Yeah,
yeah, it's that first step allows me to breathe and think, and then
yeah,
there's a step forward. And I think this is one of the things with my clients, is that one way or another they have to move, and
yeah,
it's just finding
yes,
where you can make that, even if it's the tiniest
yes,
incremental
yes, yes,
movement that we begin with. But
yes,
at some point something has to move, and that's a law of life in a sense, because you cannot avoid change. One of the other side of the risk assessment for the negative part is that you do nothing and you continue miserable, in 10 years, or something dramatic happens
yes,
and then you have no choice.
yes,
And that's the point, that's the crisis point at which I see also many people, where they've been resisting, and then something happens. The wife, husband, decides they want to divorce. The company, they're made redundant, whatever it is. And it's very often there's this secret sense of relief.
Yes, and that's the catalyst. And that
Exactly.
is the
But
catalyst. That is what will take you, yeah,
it's
somewhere.
it's buried there under the rubble of
Yeah,
fear.
yeah,
And you have to kind of
yeah.
get get through that rubble and pluck out this little flame that's there, that's relief, which really is turning into a glimmer of hope that there could be something else.
Yes.
So, okay, we're looking at that
Can I
transformation.
add something there for a moment? Because this is, you know, I said I've worked with burnout. This is exactly what happens with burnout because typical story about burnout is that someone is doing something, they're wholehearted, um, and and they have infinite energy. Everybody says, where do you get all this energy? And they say, I guess I was born that way or something. Then something changes in their situation or in themselves, and their heart goes out of the situation. Now, if they could step back and think, do I want to change my attitude, change my situation, leave my situation? Fine. Nothing, you know, they then just move on, as you say. But what happens is people's identity is tied up with what they're doing, and they don't dare to step back because they're afraid that if they step back, they're going to see that they don't want to be where they are. And what happens if I leave my job or leave my marriage? You know, and there's a childhood line which expresses this, which is, I hate spinach. This is what I learned as a kid. I hate spinach, and I'm glad I hate spinach because if I liked it, I would eat it, and I hate spinach. So, so this is why people don't change. The fear they have to do something about it. So what happens is that they drive themselves forward as if they're driving a car with the accelerator and the brake on at the same time because they're now divided against themselves. And then they hit the wall. And that is a big deal because these are very high achievers and very energetic people. And all of a sudden, and you talk about the flame, their fire is low and they can't do what they've done. And even then, they have two choices. And one choice, they're not going to come and see you or me. They're going to go to the doctor and say, doctor, make me better so I can go back. But other people say, okay, I've been warned. What do I have to do to rethink this all? And at that point, and I say, what you have to do is give up hope and keep the faith, which means hope that give up hope, that feeling that if I don't have this, I'll die. If I don't have a partner, if I don't have this job, if I don't, and keep the faith. You saying, I may never have this thing I think is so important, and I'll still be okay. And once you do that, you have some freedom to move. And
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go next because you
yeah,
talked about that, and that's exactly the thing that's so important is that detachment from the desire for, let's call it, an external um, prop maybe that says, if you have this, then you are worthy, then you're going to be happy. If you know, whatever it is that's underlying this drive, that's actually not sustainable in, you know, in the long term. At some point it's going to catch up with you and cause you a problem.
well, it was sustainable as long as your heart was in it.
it,
Once your heart's out of it, it's not sustainable.
Exactly, because then what you're doing is you're keeping it going for another reason. And
Mm.
that's where the problem lies. And so, yes, we have to give that up. And it's almost like a process of surrender. And others would call it, if we were talking in Buddhist terms, you know, acceptance and detachment.
It's called letting go of attachments in Buddhist terms
Exactly.
because the attachment is is that identity that you have invested in this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what what we're talking about is letting go of all of that. And then you're right, it's that something much stronger comes in, which
Absolutely.
it is faith. And I don't think it's possible to underestimate the importance or to overstate the importance. It is, sorry, it is possible to underestimate the importance of faith. You can't overstate the importance of
Yeah,
faith.
but when we say faith, we don't mean necessarily religious or anything. I'm simply saying I'm going to be okay, even if I haven't got this thing. I'm
Yeah.
still going to be okay. It's trust. It's a sort of trust in yourself and in life that somehow you will come through and you'll be a new person. What's wrong with that? You know?
And so here we are talking about some very fundamental things that we all wrestle with at various points in our lives. And what I loved about your book is that you talk about how imagery is a tool that we have available to us. Our imagination, put it a different way, our imagination is a tool, which of course I, as a hypnotherapist, it's, you know, it's the most important thing really, is that use of the imagination in a positive way. It's we're always using our imaginations. We use our imaginations to make us afraid. You know, if we're worried about something,
Exactly.
we're already using our imagination, because what we're doing is we're imagining a negative outcome. We're,
Exactly.
that's what worry is. Worry exists because we are imagining a negative outcome. How about we start imagining a positive outcome and see where that takes us? Well, for a start, we're going to be more relaxed, better able to deal with the situation, and so it goes on. So this is, I think, one of, well, it is the reason why I was so attracted to your book. And I'm very grateful for your time in talking about it with us today. But you have, I think, many other projects. Would you like to tell us a little bit about those?
Well, yes. So one thing which is it's a project, you could say a project is going on a long time, is that I don't know if I said this earlier, that in 1979 we started a center on a Greek island and went around the world. Now we're back to the Greek island. We have two centers. It's called Skiros Holidays, and that was a community environment and a life change place, and people came through there and made friends for life, changed their life, got new career. You know, it was a very exciting. That's still there. I still go there. I still feel, wow, you know, this is worth doing. So that's one of the big things. The other thing is basically, oh, and there's a book about it, which I did with my ex-husband, which is called Skira, Sunshine for the Soul, which a participant 40 years ago or more said that. He wrote that in one of the books, you know, the guest books or something, Sunshine for the Soul, and we loved it, so we took that on. And then I wrote a series of books, which I'll just show you. That one's called Life Choices, Life Changes, and that has all the imagery exercises and an explanation of why you do them. So that's like a textbook for all those imagery exercises. This is the joy of burnout, and that's what I've been talking about, that you need to find your joy again. It's like burnout is standing up for joy, saying, no, you can't have a life in which you're healthy and you have no joy. You've got to find your joy again, which I know you agree with. I can see that. And then there's You Are What You Imagine, which we've talked about. And then Into the Woods and Out Again. Well, that is a memoir of part of my life, which starts off with me going crazy, ending up in the mental hospital for a few months, and talks about what that's like to be in another dimension, and then moves on to starting Skiros, doing the imagery and the whole stories. But the project I'm most involved in now is that book that I mentioned that I started because of my images. and and it's called Image Work. How to work with transformational imagery, something like that. No, the complete guide to working with transformational imagery. And this is a book for people like you that work with images or work with people and want to understand how to work for individuals and groups. It's sort of my definitive, you could say, my legacy book, and then after that I'm done. That's everybody says no, no, no. I said, yeah, this is it, I'm done. So this is my last statement, that this is where I stop. I want to hand this on. I want to tell you everything I know about running a group, running an individual session, using imagery, knowing how to move from a conversation to an image and all that, so that people can use it. Because otherwise I feel I've wasted, it's wasted. When I go, the work goes, and it's good work. So I want people to use it.
I think what we need to do is we need to have you back. I think that there are many conversations to be
Well,
had.
there are many conversations, yes. There are, and I think we are on very similar wavelength, aren't we? So,
We certainly
yeah,
are. So I'm very
yeah.
grateful for your time today.
Thank you.
And
I'm grateful to you
I
as
will
well.
I
Yeah.
will put a link to your website and to the book we've been talking about today, which, just a reminder, is called You Are What You Imagine. And so that will be on the description box, and you'll just have to look out for when Dina joins us again.
I look forward to that.
Thank you, Dina, for your time today, and thank you all for watching. Next time, we are going to be looking at healthy fashion. Until then, goodbye.